Hey, with your evening story channel, I post new interesting stories every day. Subscribe and click the bell to not miss it. Vanessa swore as befitted a harbor freight forwarder, not a very proper lady in the status of a lawyer, and jumped over the puddle. She listened. The high heels held. She could already see the office building ahead. There was only 10 minutes left to negotiate. She would make it. Auntie, please help. Vanessa sighed doomedly, looked at her watch, and turned to the voice. Standing in front of her was a boy of about 7 years old at most. He was supposed to be a gypsy beggar, but here was the light color of his hair. Vanessa even thought that he was probably just dyed so that people would give him more handouts. Looking at the boy smearing blood all over his face from behind his broken nose, she realized the negotiations could be forgotten. Basically, today had been a bad day for yesterday. Yeah, that happens too. Vanessa had been working at this company for 2 years and had been dating her boss for a year. It hadn't started right away, and it was wrong to call it some kind of dirty affair. She and James had known each other when they were very young, and then their paths had diverged. They weren't dating at the time, they weren't lovers. They met 25 years later and didn't recognize each other. How could they recognize each other from an angular, skinny guy? James had grown into a broad-shouldered, tall man. He smelled of confidence and power. Vanessa, on the other hand, had been terribly self-conscious about her pimples and hid her face under a scarf. Now she looked at him, proudly squaring her shoulders. Besides, earlier the girl had a couple of dozens of extra pounds. And now, despite her age, she had already passed the 40th milestone. Her figure could be the envy of the youngest girls. Vanessa, are you? She looked up in surprise and almost fell over. James. They laughed, they hugged. They'd both lived pretty full lives. James had become a successful businessman. Married twice. He had divorced his second wife not long ago. And when he talked about it, his cheekbones were jaundiced. He only mentioned that he'd died early and they'd had a son. Vanessa realized it was better not to ask anything. Not the right topic for almost strangers. She told her she'd been married too. Happily, she thought. But a year ago, her husband left her for a younger woman, and Vanessa was left with a broken family trowel. She sold everything she got after the divorce and decided to start with a clean slate in another city. It was the first time she'd ever been to a job interview. Never been anywhere else. James was impressed with her track record and immediately said he was taking her on. Vanessa's salary was more than satisfactory. The relationship was just friendly at first. They had dinner together a few times. But Vanessa felt that there was something between them. Something that could not be touched, otherwise it would exploded. They lasted a year. And then, when they got held up before some negotiations at work, James just kissed her, and it was on. Vanessa thought she could never be happy again, and here she was. She expected James to take action after a year of seeing her, but it was as if he was cocooned in a cocoon as the conversation got serious. He wouldn't let her go, but he wasn't going to get serious. It was yesterday that she'd told him everything, that they were breaking up, that she was old enough to try to start a family, that she didn't want to be lonely in her old age. James turned pale red, clenched his fist, and then said, I hope this doesn't affect our working relationship, Vanessa. Wouldn't want to lose an employee like you because of a personal misunderstanding. Vanessa almost burst with anger, but quickly got over herself because she knew perfectly well. James is just a coward, and she was sure James loved her as much as she loved him. But she wasn't 25, and she handled her emotions somehow. Of course, James. Although, to be honest, I'm not really sure what kind of personal relationship we're talking about. Is it a relationship so much like a friendly meeting, you might say? Vanessa gave her boss a mental tongue lashing and sprinted out of his office. She heard it when she closed the door. James let out a real animal growl, and she hurried out the door. She overslept this morning. Then the car wouldn't start. Then she couldn't get a cab, but she caught a shuttle bus. Passengers pelted her business suit and high heels with scornful glances. And when she almost made it, "What's wrong? What can I do for you? Get a tissue." The boy, sobbing, told her that he was carrying a bag home, in which his aunt was delivering groceries to his grandmother. The boys, apparently, the locals took the bag and threw it on the roof, and he can't get up there. If he did not bring the groceries, his grandmother would lock him in the pantry with mice, and would not give him food for 3 days. Vanessa even shook her head, because to hear about such punishments in the modern world was even fantastic. But the girl who appeared out of nowhere, who, by the way, was a true gypsy, immediately dismissed all doubts. "Oh, Liam, the grandmother is already looking for you," shouting all over the street. She took out her stick and told me to prepare the storeroom. The boy, Liam, said, "I won't go to the closet. When I fall asleep, mice are running all over me. I'm afraid they will eat me." In the next few moments, Vanessa was wondering what she should do. She got the bag, though she broke her heel and even tore her skirt a little. But it didn't matter. She gave the bag to the girl and told her to take it to her grandmother. "Liam will stay with me for a while. Just say so. If she insults me, I'll report her. I don't want her to think she can get away with it. I'm taking him to the hospital to have his bruises rewritten." The girl nodded and said I would. What a sight the grandmother would look like. Vanessa took the boy's hand and disappeared as if she had never been there. "Well, friend, come sit with me for a while they fire me." The boy sniffed his nose. "You're getting fired because of me?" "No, it's nothing to do with you. It's just a coincidence. Vanessa has already decided that she's going to file a report. She wasn't going to wait for James to show her the door." My heart was aching. But it wouldn't be the first time. She could handle it. James was waiting for her, really waiting for her. You could tell right away. Apparently the negotiations were already over. Or maybe they hadn't even started. What kind of negotiations without a lawyer? She didn't even have time to say anything. "Vanessa, I hope you realize what you've done. You sabotaged an important negotiation. You set everyone up." He was talking in a way that made it sound like glass was going to fly out the windows. The worst part was that James wouldn't even let her get a word in edgewise, and he wouldn't look her in the eye. His tirade didn't end soon enough, and Vanessa, frankly, had no desire to say anything. But something had to be said. "James, I couldn't get past the boy's resentment. You're absolutely right. This is the unacceptable behavior for a lawyer. That's why I've decided to file a report." The boss exploded again, but Vanessa had already sat down at a small table in the corner and quickly wrote something. She didn't notice that the same Liam she had left in the waiting room had entered the office. He approached James and touched his arm. He said, "Don't yell at her. She's kind." James looked at the boy in surprise and suddenly froze. Vanessa immediately sensed the change in the air. She jumped up and walked over to James. "What's the matter with you? You're not well, you're pale." But he wasn't looking at her, he was looking at the boy, or rather at his hand, at the spot above the thumb, where there was a mole shaped like a ball pierced by an arrow. The man squeezed Vanessa's hand so tightly she wanted to howl. She held back. Without taking his eyes off the frightened boy, Lisa shouted. An equally frightened secretary immediately appeared in the doorway. "I'm listening. The child must be fed, watered, and occupied. Don't let him go anywhere. It's your responsibility. We need to talk." The secretary nodded, took Liam by the arm, and led her out of the office. Vanessa looked tensely at James. He went to the bar, poured himself half a glass of whiskey, and drank it down. He began to speak without even turning to Vanessa. "I never told you about my first wife or my son. My wife died early. Charles was only 15 at the time. He blamed me for everything. And rightly so. I'd forgotten all about her. She was quiet, family-oriented, not social. She liked to be at home, quiet books. And I was starting to make money. Parties, corporate parties, baths with partners. And of course, beautiful young companions I didn't notice. I missed the moment when she fell ill because I was not interested in her at all. She burned out within a year, only at the funeral. I realized that all of this might not have happened if I had been more attentive. Charles barely spoke to me. He did everything out of spite. At some point, I got tired. I brought a young wife into the house. I thought she was perfect. She was when I gave her a lot of money. Charles figured her out right away and tried to open my eyes. But where was it? And then that bitch made it look like my son was molesting her. I believed it, kicked him out of the house. A year later, I got a call from the hospital. My son was there. He'd been in a car accident. He told me he never molested her. I didn't care. I asked him not to leave. He also told me that he had a Romani wife and that she was in danger because she had contacted him. He's dead. I didn't even think about what he said. My grief was too great to pay attention to any words about gypsies. It was as if I had fallen into hibernation, and I woke up only when my wife tried to take my business away from me. That was just before he showed up. He was silent for a moment, then turned to her. I hadn't said the most important thing. My son had the exact same mole exactly like this kid. I don't know that it could be a common coincidence, but isn't that a lot of coincidences for one person? Vanessa remained silent, shocked, but something had to be done, some way to find out. Sure, I'll find out, Vanessa. Please take him away. For now, I'll do what I should have done right after my son's death. James showed up on her doorstep. 4 days later, he looked like a train had run over him. Walked in silence, sat down. Where he sleeps 2 hours a night, he's so nice, he's really smart, even though he didn't learn anything. I know Charles was smart too. That's my grandson, His mother, not like that. His gypsy grandmother also had a daughter by a non-gypsy. She was kicked out of the family for that, but the child was kept. And the girl grew up refusing to obey gypsy law. Then she met Charles. That's basically it. After an unknown car hit my son, Charles was so called. That girl gave birth to a child and immediately disappeared. Not without the help of her kin, I'm sure. Grandma runs the place. She's a bitch. That's okay. It's going to give their Tabra a good shake. She looked at the tired James, and she felt so sorry for him. He looked her in the eye. Vanessa, forgive me if I'm an idiot. I feel so bad without you, and I keep resisting. Let's get married. You're not going to leave me alone with my grandson. I just don't know how to communicate with him. Play with him. Talk to him. How do you even explain things to him? Vanessa turned away so he wouldn't see her eyes while James was gone. She decided to hell with the marriage. She was having such a good time with James. Why did she have to get a stamp in her passport? It's so last century. And here he was, and she had to change her plans again. She turned around. She wanted to tell him that, of course, she was okay with it. But James was asleep. Asleep, sitting up and smiling in his sleep. She went to the bedroom and got the bedding. Carefully, she put a pillow under his head, covered James with a blanket, sat down in front of him. You may not hear me, but you're the most obnoxious man in the world. I should run away from you. But then who's going to raise you effectively? It's just like you, impulsive, hot-tempered. I'll have to marry you. James sighed happily and hugged the pillow with both arms. Vanessa returned to the bedroom. Liam was asleep on the couch. He was smiling in his sleep and hugged the pillow tightly with both arms, just like his grandfather on the other couch.